welcome back. Another wonderful day of Fusion 360. We're going to look at the rendering environment today and a couple quick tips on how to really make your renders look nice, make them look as real as possible. Now, this is always dependent on you. It's dependent on your sort of expertise or experience, especially with photography or doing things in real life with taking photos of objects or even people, because it's the same skill set and it transfers over here in the exact same way. It's just about transferring it over to this different functions that Fusion has. And I'll show you a couple extra tips on how to make little details look more real than what you really might be getting right now. So if you're watching this video, then you are here basically either to learn how to use the render environment from scratch or to really enhance your skills in the rendering environment. I'm not saying I'm the best at this. I'm just saying that I have experience doing this over a number of years, and I have found what I think are some of the best tips and tricks to really get the highest quality out of your renders. Now, this has just been updated. I don't know what it is. If you want to know what updates are, this green bar pops up. Just click that and you can find out what the updates are from Autodesk. They do this all the time. It's great. I like how it's an auto update function. But aside from that, when you open up your file, so if you're following along with this video series, this is the third video in the series so far. The second video, we made this bolt together, an M3 3mm bolt. Now I changed this a little bit for the rendering before I made this video. So what I did here, and I'll talk about this in a bit, is I added some fillets on all the edges. So every single edge, every single thing has a fillet. And this is sort of important for rendering because if you think about real life, it is not going to have sharp edges. If I go back here before this, these edges are very, very sharp. You'll never have this in real life. If you look at any object you make and create, it's going to have some kind of artifact. It's going to have some chips. It's going to have different things back and forth that affect how the light reflects off that object. The material is also important, and we'll deal with how to fix the material so that they look as good as possible for that given object that you are using, because the same material will react differently depending on lighting situations, depending on the object you're working with, the size of the object. So Fusion kind of anticipates a real world sizing when it's doing rendering, and that's a good standard to keep because then it gives you something to bounce off of when you are thinking about how you are rendering your objects to look as real as possible. We can do some great stuff with this program. It's not going to be perfect ever, but if you know how the program thinks, then you can really get almost unlimited quality out of this, and you can learn a couple things from this video within that regard. So let's get back to the render environment and go through this quickly for those that are just starting out. You won't have these down here. These are some renders I'm doing as an example. You won't have this here. This shows you the keys. So, right, hello is right there. I don't want an offset. These are just key commands and key functions. I have shift and I have my command. I'm on Mac, just in case you're wondering. If you're on Windows, when I hit the command button, all you do is push the control instead. Now, in the rendering environment, you're going to lose a couple things over here. But you're especially going to be using this, the name views. It's very important. Why? Because this is going to keep some standards across your attempts to render, because you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. When I render something, it might not come out the way I want. And having a name view is going to be very, very helpful to keep the exact same angle. You notice how everything has changed when I click that? Because this view, the top side view, used to be, I'm going to mess this up. Let's make another one. It used to be like this, where I kind of aligned everything in my screen, and then I created this name view, and I called it, let's say, top side example. I called it this, and then I rendered out. Now, why I did this is because when I rendered, I can, no matter what I do with this and no matter what angle I change it to, right, I can always come back to that original attempt and that exact view I had. It's not going to save things like lighting settings and the orientation of the environment, but it's going to save your angle versus the object that you're rendering or looking at. So this is like the camera. You are the camera looking at the object. Now, when I first tried to render these, it was a bit too far away. You can see right here, way too far away. And that's basically what I had for here, this exact example. So what I did is I just zoomed in, and then I right-clicked on here, and I went Update Name View, and I ended up with this, where it's just off screen, and that gave me a better angle for this look. Let me pull it up. So it's a lot closer and a better orientation within the screen. So just to compare back again, this was the first attempt, not opening up. Escape, open. All right, whatever. Let's go back here. This happens sometimes. I don't know why Fusion does this, but it just happens. So that happens there. So it was too far away, and all I did was fix it to that one. Now, the next step is to consider the lighting scenario. So when you first come into Fusion, pick the angle you kind of want to start with as an attempt. If you know already, go ahead, do it, but it'll probably be an attempt and you'll fix it later. And just right-click, Create Name View, and it saves it. It's really handy, it's quick, and that's a good first step to have. It's kind of the same as when you're in the design environment. The first step to do is to set up basically your selection process, because it defaults to nothing. And your selection process you like, right, might be your own thing. And your workflow is dependent on all this kind of stuff. And you get the hang of it as you go along with sort of the defaults you like to have. So the first thing you have to do is select your material. And that can be anything. I have a whole bunch of examples here already. The first one we tried, this is this right now, is brass, which is the old brass. There's a matte version. Matte, if you don't know what that is, it's just less reflective. If you think about matte cars, matte black cars, it's those cars that look like they don't have any reflection on them, versus a standard black car has a reflection of the world around it. If you don't have the material, or the appearance material, it's not an actual material, it's just kind of a coating on top of your object, you can download it from these little download buttons there. It's really, really simple. You can go through, there's tons of materials in here. Some are great, some are okay, and there's a few that are kind of, I don't know why they're in here myself, but who knows, people might use them. Things like the wood, the solid wood, are kind of new. These ones have a bit more of a restriction on them. So as an example, if this one, the brass is old, the old brass, if I double click it, the default scale will be 50 for you. So if I zoom in, you can see that there's all these different artifacts, but they're quite large. It's meant to look like an old brass object, like it's kind of worn out a bit. Let me show you what it looks like if we quickly try to render something as an example. So you can see all those artifacts, those bumps and cuts and whatever else that it's attempting to show you, are quite large. This is where you're going to be changing your material sizes. Now, the rule of thumb for me, depending on the object, if it's let's say it's the size of your fist, the object you're making, I usually go around 40 to 44-ish in scale. And you're going to adjust this depending on certain materials here, certain appearances. But for some reason, I keep going back to that range. For this, because it's a very small object, this is only a 3 millimeter diameter bolt with 10 or 13 millimeters tall. It's not very large. So I ended up going way down to about 20 or so. And what that did is it gave me a lot more detail, because it's basically shrinking that skin that looks like old brass on top. And you can see just all the extra details coming out here. So you're getting more out of your materials. And this is a really important thing that I really need to get your head around here, where you can adjust the scale. Other things like the roughness and rotation are also important. My computer's working really hard right now trying to render that. We have rotation. Obviously, it's going to spin the object, or spin the material, I mean, not the object. So I can drag it and you can see things moving. Now, let's say the wood grain. Let me pull up the wood. Can't remove it. The wood grain, let's say you don't like the way that grain is there. You should, oh, this one is the new one. You can't really spin it. Let me do the other older style wood. So I got to render this a bit, and you can't even see it there. Either way, you can rotate it. You can't see it there until it gets more detail rendered in. But that's one example. Let me find one that might, with the brushed aluminum, bead blasted, brushed linear. Download and throw it on. It's quite quick. Okay, here's a good example. So we have these lines as if you have this steel brush running across the aluminum when it's finished. Aluminum brushed. You can rotate those lines. You can see how you can see how things are adjusting. So you can change lots of stuff. The roughness is going to be basically the opposite of its reflectancy. So the more rough it is, the less it will reflect direct on you. So it will look more matte. It's not necessarily a matte option to add that, to remove the reflection altogether. What it's doing is sort of giving you a simulated roughness of the material, which will scatter the light more, because the more rough or more dents and bumps you have in a material, the different angles will apply for the way the light kind of scatters out. So it's one way of thinking about that I usually do is just, you can see right now, just the reflection is a lot more direct, where it's flatter reflections. In this one, you can see there's a lot more stuff happening because the light is bouncing off on more and more angles. So let's go back to our old brass. I'm using this because it's a really easy way just to show you those details, right, in your render. The next thing to do after your appearance is chosen, you can mess around with this, is you can also, sorry, I missed one thing. You can also apply appearances to single faces. We have bodies and faces. Let's say I do the granite on the inside for some reason. You can apply faces, but when you have chamfers and fillets, those are also faces. So let's say I select, hold shift and select all these parts, drag it over, right? Every single turn and corner is considered a face for the materials. Let's go back and put everything back to brass. Yes, remove everything and put a brand new one. Zooming out for days. Hit escape, and we're going to the next thing, which is the other, one of a few very, very important settings you're going to look into. So the default for me, and you can change the default if you want, it's going to be environment settings. And these environment settings is mimicking a real world environment. Now, those are all here under the environment library. You can actually add your own with a custom environment. So you can go to the internet and find, people have created environments for different programs and different things, but they typically are similar file types. And the way they make those environments and the way that it's laid out in those file types, kind of Fusion uses those. So you can find some really interesting things. The locations, right? If you want to go into the top of a mountain, you can find an environment that's the top of the mountain. You can find the same environment, but with different lighting. So you got dusk and dawn or midday lighting, and it always changes. So those things are important too, the lighting sets that are applied to those environments. Fusion itself has some really great environments. Some of them I don't myself know. The dry lake bed maybe for a few things, but the crossroads and the field, I'm not sure what those are for necessarily, but who knows? I mean, everyone has their own preferences, and depending on what you design, they've given you a few examples of real world environments. The other ones are lighting simulations. So it's basically like putting your object or whatever you've objects into a stage. A Hollywood stage where it's a big grayed out ground and walls and everything else, and they've simulated the lighting in different ways. They have rim highlight, sharp highlight, skylight, so it's just from above, and so on. So if I go, let's say, to rim highlights, it's already on, sorry, it's right there, that's my current one. If I go to soft highlights, drag it over, if I look around at the top, you're going to see the lights. These are the actual simulated lights, and these are obviously two lights on two sides, so, and they are diffused. I can't even zoom out, so they're diffused lights. Let's go to skylight. Look up, so you can see it's above. It's a whole bunch of individual skylights. I'm guessing 9 of them. Let's try grid lights. And they're all different lighting sets. So this one has slight angles, but it's harder, harsher lights. It looks like it's kind of mimicking LEDs instead of LEDs, right? If I go back to the soft, was it soft? You can see it's the same lighting source, the same areas, same angles, but it's more of a diffuser in front of lights. If you don't know what a diffuser is, just type in lighting diffuser and you'll see what I mean. It sort of helps soften the light, but also it scatters it in a more even tone across whatever you're lighting. The other one that's my favorite that I always have trouble with downloading is the photo booth. If I click this, it's going to just spin for days. It's going to go on forever. It doesn't actually download. I don't know why. I can't even use it. So what I've done is I've contacted Autodesk, and they have helped me as best they can, but it's not fixing it in the meantime. But in the forums, if you type in photo booth won't download into Google or Bing or whatever you want, you can find that there is a forum talking about this issue. Other people have the same issue, and one of the Autodesk employees has supplied a link to a cloud storage that has the photo booth and a few other environments there. So you can download the actual environment separately from Fusion 360, and all you do is import it like a secondary environment with using this button here, and you just drag it in. So you can get it. If it does this for you, I'm sorry, you're in the same boat as me for some reason. You know, delete the program, uninstall everything, it still does the same thing. So there's always ways around it. So we're going to go to rim highlights. I just like this one because it gives me diffuse lights from the distance, but on a few other angles. So it gives me a lot of detail and shadows. And that's my next big topic, is the shadows. Shadows are super important. If you have everything lighted from all angles, then you have no definition. It just looks like some weird world that doesn't exist. You need shadows. And aligning those shadows, if I turn my stuff here, aligning those shadows, you can see it's brighter here but darker over here, is important. And this is where we get to the next thing with the brightness, which is obviously how bright things can get. Let's go back to 1000, which is the default, and the position. Now, when you click the position, you're going to get this stuff down here. If you don't have ground scale, it's only because you either don't have the ground turned on like this, or you have flattened ground turned off. That's it. Really simple stuff. You don't really need this. I'll show you why in a bit. There's a few scenarios, but otherwise you basically only need rotation. Now watch the shadow. So we have the lighting here and this. This position is not going to rotate the object. It's actually going to rotate the environment around the object, which means if I turn this, the whole environment changes, but the object is staying where it is. So let me go back here. And so again, watch the shadow. I'll turn it back to, I think it was 0, somewhere around 0. Anyways, the lighting will change. So you're adjusting basically where the shadow is coming. And this is also dependent on the environments and where the lighting is in each environment. So it really changes when you put in different environments. Now, one quick rule that I like to tell people is, whatever your angle is, try to have one obvious side of your object in a shadow. Let's rotate until we can find a good, just like this. Now it won't look like this in the render. This shadow won't be as obvious. This is just showing you basically where the lighting's coming from. But you can see that this half is mostly shadowed and this half is lighting. This is going to give a really drastic effect. And with this render environment, drastic is going to look more realistic than non-drastic. If you go for a very subtle lighting changes where there's not much shadow definition, where there's no these harsh shadow changes, you will probably not think it's as realistic as you want it to. So let me show you this. This is the fast render. This is not going to look amazing, but you can see that the inside's still lighting up a little bit, but I'm getting these shadows coming out. Now, obviously it's not the same as this view, right, when I start rendering this out, but you get the sense of what's happening. Now, if I change this, it's going to restart here, but you can move around. One problem I see with explaining with this bolt is that it's round. It's just a round object, so every angle is curved. If I had a flatter, squared object, it could be anything, then it might be a bit more obvious. Watch this because you can see the reflection of the lighting. You don't want this. In any photography setting, you'll never ever have that. If you do have it, it's on purpose for a specific reason, but you want to avoid that. And basically you're going to go where that is off screen. So just mess around with that on your own. The next thing we're going to talk about is the environment selection with color. So you can change it anything you want. You can make the background, let's say, hot pink. Oh, why did I hit cancel? Right? Now here's one problem that works, and this is why I never use it, is in real life, the environment reflects onto the object. Doesn't matter what object you have, there will be some kind of reciprocal relationship between the environment and the object with lighting. If I render this out, this object should have pink hues in it. It does not. It looks like it was really badly cut out and just placed on this from Photoshop or whatever else. So this is why I don't use solid color. And you don't necessarily need it as well. Let's say you're going for, you don't want to use the background. That's fine. You don't have to use the background. You can, let's say you go to green screen. You can do that. But you don't even need to do this because that's an extra step. What you do is render for the environment with the lighting you like. Let's say you like this, you render it out. And when you download, when you get your renders, you choose the one you want. And when you download it, you're actually going to be choosing the file type. Now this is important because PNG is going to have a transparent background if you select the transparent background. TIFF is a larger file size. It has more data. It's a better quality photo. So if you're okay with having, let's say, 100 megabyte photo, the PNG will be maybe, depending on the size, let's say between a megabyte to 10 megabytes. The TIFF will be 100 or so. So you can actually choose the transparent where you have the background removed altogether, where it's just the object. So you don't even need to do anything with the green screen. It's just an extra unnecessary step. So the next thing we have is our flattened ground plane. So the ground plane is really useful if you're actually going to be using the environment and not doing that transparency thing. Because if you do the transparency thing, the shadows will not show up. This reflections, you can see right here, is a direct reflection of the object on the environment. So if you have a flat ground that's very, very, very flat, a nice clear paint, or let's say a mirror or a piece of glass, you're going to have reflections, right? The scenic photos with mountains over top of a lake, the mountains, it looks like a mirror image of the mountains in the lake. That's the idea we're going for. And this is dependent also on the roughness of the ground. If you put it to 0, you're going to have a direct reflection, and it will, you can kind of see it right now. Let me zoom in as it renders for a second. So you get a better reflection, and the shadows become a lot harsher. If you rough it up, the reflection goes away and it becomes as minimal as possible. For myself, I like around 0.3, maybe 0.4. I'm not a big fan of the hard reflections. If you want that, do it. I mean, it's your render, your photos, so your style, right? This is where you get to make your own version of whatever you're doing. So flattened ground obviously is going to be for the whole background. If I flatten it, you see there's an actual ground here. If I don't flatten it, it looks like it's kind of one constant flow of just a gray area. So there's a flattened ground, and then not flattened, it just kind of flows up with the lighting. It doesn't actually show any harsh edges or ground changes. And the ground plane is the entire thing on or off. That's that. Next thing, camera. If you know what these are, great. If you don't know what these are, don't worry. You probably will never use them. You want to find out, go ahead, look it up. This is just different types of camera lenses and functionalities. The whole thing down here, the camera thing, is basically for you, because when you're looking at your object, right, when I move, it's moving you. And imagine yourself as being a camera. You are a camera inside Fusion 360 looking at an object, which means you, like your eyeballs, have a lens. And those lenses can be changed. Let me close this, and we have the focal length. This is the curve of the lenses in the camera, or your eyeballs. The standard eye for the human eye is about 50 50 millimeter focal length. The default for Fusion is 90. I think it's just to give a bit more perspective around the object, because it curves the object around the center of the lens, not the center of the object, center of your lens. If you go really crazy, you can do that fisheye thing. Fisheye lenses, if you know what I'm talking about, or I think it's actually the opposite. This is the fisheyes are convex, and this will be concave, or reverse that if I made a mistake. So this is where you really mess around. You can go just way too big of a lens, way too big of a focal length. So I'm going to go back to 90, which is the default. If you forget what these are, there's this button here, Restore Defaults. And it works great, but for right now, for some reason, Fusion does this. If I click it, it goes black. That's fine. Don't worry, you didn't ruin anything. What it's done is, for some reason, it hasn't reset the view. It has reset the parameters. So I think it's in conflict. So all you do is hit Design or whatever else, change the environment and come back, and it will be defaulted the way you just clicked it, but you'll fix this kind of stuff. The exposure is going to be the brightness. So this is how much light is being let into the lens. I think 8.8 was the default. And the depth of field, you can change the center of focus and the blur around it. This means if you have, let's say you're building a large object and you want to get a nice photo that has the back, an actual blur, because sometimes when you get proper photography, lens with the f-stop and the light coming in and the blur and the focal length, you're going to get this sort of blur behind your centerpiece. If this is the centerpiece and there's stuff in the background, you can increase that blur, which will, or the center of focus, and then that will blur out the back a bit. Or if you center on the back stuff, you can blur out this a bit. So you can change the focal point, that's this. Forget what I'm saying. I hope you know what I mean. I'm not a photographer. I don't know all the terms, so I'm kind of going off the very little I know. And then you have the aspect ratio as the last thing in the camera functions. 1:1, which is kind of like a Instagram look. 4:3 is a standard photograph professionally. You got widescreen, landscapes, and everything else. Portraits. You can change it and do your own if you want. This is not going to be fractions. It's going to be actual sizes. I think if you want to go HD, it's 1920 by 1080, right? 1080p, 180, 1080p. So you can do whatever you want. You can look up certain aspect ratios and get specific ones. If you want to do 4K or 8K, it's up to you. Just realize that when you do that, you're going to have to zoom to a different length. If you're doing 8K, it's going to be a lot larger than your screen, unless you have an 8K screen itself, because what you see is based on your screen and not based on this. So this is actually larger than my screen technically, so I'll have to zoom in even more, and then what's going to happen is it will have the full view when it renders out, because it's kind of like a taken back full graphics render. That sounded very confusing, I'm sorry. Decal, you can do this in the design environment under your where is it, insert decal. This is where you usually do it. I don't know why they have it in render, but it's there if you want. We have texture map controls. That has to do with the actual appearance here. If you look at the example it gives, you can adjust the appearance. That plaster, so the brass plaster on top of our object, that makes it look like brass. You can move it a bit and angle it a bit in a different way. I have actually never used it myself. And then we have right here the in-canvas rendering. Now this is not going to be your final render. This is sort of a practice. And my typical default is to, when I first go to render, is to click our settings and click fast. And I've been using fast so far when you see this kind of stuff. And the reason being is it's just a lot quicker to see what I want versus waiting for the advance, which looks better. It looks better, but it takes longer. So unless you have an amazing graphics card, top of the line graphics card, the advance is going to take quite a while. You can see it's doing individual pixels. It's going to take quite a while to work through. So the fast one, I really get the idea of what I'm going for a lot quicker. For some reason, it's not. Why did it do that? That was weird. Maybe something else is slowing my computer down right now. Probably the recording of the video. So that's it. Just fast is fine. The rest of it, I honestly wouldn't touch it because it's kind of a redundant function. The capture image is going to be just for what you see here. It's not going to work. Stop. Not going to work if you are rendering a practice here. If I do this and it renders nicely, if it looks nice on the screen, I hit this, it won't let me do anything here, right? Because the capture image is only for this view, the default render environment view, not the render out view. So you can change it here, and you can see what this might actually give you a sense of what your zoom level will look like, but it will look like this here. I don't really use this ever either. And the last thing is the final step in the render environment to get your results. So if you click this, let's say you have it all lined up nicely. I get my top side example view. I click render here. You're going to have a couple different options. And I'm going to go through this over the next minute or so. It's not that complicated. Basically, depending on your license, so I have an education license up here. I have infinite credits. I have a limit of number of credits I can use per render, but I have an infinite number of credits so I can render out, hundreds of different renders. And this is on the cloud. So I mean, when I use credits, I'm rendering on Autodesk's cloud servers. They are very powerful. They have massive amounts of servers that do a great job at all this, including running Fusion. This is a cloud-based program. So you can use their computers to render and save all that extra work on your computer. So you're saving power, you're saving time, and you're saving the extra heat that your computer creates. You can also choose to do that if you have a great graphics card. Good. Local render. I've used this a few times a few years ago, but I found once the cloud was brought in, I just used this instead. Standard render versus final render. I guess this is going to be dependent on how many credits you have or want to use. And then the same thing goes with local. My standard is cloud final. What changes is the size of my render. So if you click back and forth, you have different output options. It's not going to actually give you a video output. It's still going to give you a basically what the video would look like as a photo. And what you would do then is you would actually create an animation, which is what you need to do first. If you want to make a little video, a render video of your object moving, you have a bunch of joints. So they gave an example of, it looks like some kind of gear set, differential it looks like, for a car. You make the animation, and when the animation in this workspace works perfectly, then you come back here, set up your render to be the angle and the look and lighting you like. You'd click render, you'd go to your video, you go 1080p, render out, and it will render a photo. And what you would do then is you'd have your render photo, and this button here is render as the actual animation, because Autodesk on the cloud services has already kind of figured out what that animation will look like. And I don't remember if it's instant or it takes a little bit extra time once you click this button, but what you'll get is a video of your animation being rendered from whatever angle you're looking at. So that's what that is. And you can choose different options: mobile, print, custom. So let's say I go web, for web, and I go whatever this resolution is. It's not even 1080p. Let's say you want to make it larger. You don't like what's here, but you need that aspect ratio. You need that exact format of width and height. Over here to custom, because it's defaulted into this, click the lock button. So I have web, this one. I like that format. Lock it. I'm going to increase this. The maximum is 4,000. You look down here, enter a size between 108 and 4,000. 4,000, it locks that aspect ratio. So I can get the maximum quality render, which is going to be a very large photo. Takes way more credits. But I also have that same aspect ratio as that one. So that's one little tip that I like to give out. And you hit render, and it renders out your object. Now this is going to be far away. So why don't we try a new one? I'll show you in a second. Let's go aluminum brushed. And I'm going to shrink that down to, let's say 30. Let's see what happens. Good, 30. And while I finish the video, that's going to render out. I'll come back after once it's all finished. The web, lock, go to 4000, and we're set. Click render. Saves a brand new document. The version changes, everything changes, and I get my possible render waiting to go. So it's right now it's working. So its job is currently running. Now, down below, you're going to have your renders that you already have done. You've already finished. And they're going to save here. You can click them and delete them if you don't like them, because sometimes you get clogged up with too many practice attempts. If you get this little tab here, it's only because you've rendered multiple versions of your object. Let's say you changed materials, you changed the angles around a whole bunch, but you haven't actually changed anything on the object itself. Now, what I mean by that is you haven't, let's say, added a fillet or a chamfer or extended something or whatever. Anything you do in the design environment will change to a separate image group. And this is where here I did a couple different attempts with different materials, but it's the same, nothing changed on the object itself. So I have the wood. This is the high quality wood. Let's zoom in, which I'm not a fan of this one on the bolt. It doesn't look very good, to be honest, for this scenario. It's a great material. Let's go over, I think this is no, that's the old wood. This is one of my favorite materials. It's the textured plastic. And you can look, it just has all these little artifacts here and there. It looks much more real. I mean, you wouldn't have a bolt that looks like this, but if you're doing something that would use this material in real life, then this is one of my favorites of all time. I have the chrome, black chrome, that's gold, or brass. Here's the black chrome, a little bit too shiny. And this is where I'm going to get into the kind of a trick that I'll teach you how to get fixing the dark spots you don't like, because you can't change the lighting in the environment, but you can add lights. You can add your own. And here's where I'm going to show you a quick trick. So in here, I have this black area, and I'm using the same scene settings I have right now. It looks fine on the outside. It's not perfect, but I do a couple things later on to fix that even more. Either way, it's fine the way it is, but I want to fill in that that area to look more like this. It's the exact same thing, but now I actually have some definition in here. Because the chrome is very, very shiny, it's very mirror-like, you get that kind of funhouse look inside here. It wasn't intentional, it's just that's what happens with this kind of scenario. But you can actually see stuff happening inside. Now, what I did is this. Go to your appearance panel. Let's find black chrome. And then I found my view. So this is my view I used to render. So make sure you keep these things from the very start. And then what I did is I think, okay, so I can see this, and I can see this, but I can't see the one back here. What I do is I zoom in, turn it around to this backside, go to my face, and I went up to, I think it was miscellaneous, emissive. And I used one of these light bulbs. So I think I used the 8 lumens, 8 LM, and right here, and I just drag it over, and now this face has become a light in itself. You're basically adding your own lighting, and this is where you can illuminate things, and you can adjust how bright it is. I think the default is much, much brighter. The default's 13,000, 130,000 lumens. I brought it down to 1,000, and it gave me that very minimal effect. So you're going to want to change the luminancy, and you can test it by going to your thing and clicking your play button and testing it out. Now, yours might be faster than mine right now, but either way, you can test it, come back, and you can change it to be what you want. I'm going to get rid of that. Right click, unassign, and delete. So that is the trick that I like to tell people, where you can actually fill in those blank spots, because the environments won't be perfect. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to come back in a few minutes, 2 minutes, once this is done. So you're going to see this finished in 3, 2, 1. Well, look at that. So I tried to render this a few different times and I've gotten the same result every single time. This is brand new to me. I've never actually had this happen to me. So I do not know why we are getting results like this. If you look at it, look at this. Let me pull up the full list. I tried, the original one was here and I tried this. Look at that, it's a disaster. And then all of this, I actually tried to do different, I'll cancel that. Different scenes. I dragged in different scenes. I changed the lighting. I changed the angle, everything. I went to a different material. I thought it was material. I restarted the program, came back, tried it again, and it's not working again. Something must be going on. Maybe this is an update that has a bit of a glitch in it, but either way, now every time I render is different. I even tried a different resolution. I went just the basic this, 1 credit, didn't work. So my example is not going to work out for you. I'm sorry about that. But either way, I have other ones to show you. So you can see that you can actually get some decent stuff out of the rendering function in Fusion. Now, before I move on to the very last thing, I love this. This is the bigger than life view. I do this all the time. If you really want to show off some object, I make it look bigger than it really is. I mean, this is a 3mm bolt. It's just tiny as it can be for objects. But we do this by just, to reference again, you can change the focal length, right? Zoom out, bring this up. So you go, the ground plane disappears, but I go just above it. So I'm basically sitting on the ground looking up. And then I adjust the focal length to be a little bit bigger. And I start rendering out. And you can see it's going to go to, what did I do? Oh, we got to change it fast. It goes to this bigger than life view, and you can adjust everything. So that's what I do for that. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about, you can end the video if you want, unless you want to know my little tip and trick about getting the best perfection result with your objects, is what I did in the design area. I've actually tried to make this video, this is my 4th attempt making the video over a few days. It's just things keep coming up and changing, so this is fine. You know, 3rd, 4th time is the best try, I guess. What I did is the original object didn't have these little fillets around the edges here. So you can see that there's these fillets. So if I pull back to right before, let me see. There it is. So what I did is the original object in the second video, you can see it. This edge here is not filleted, and these inside edges on the Allen key insert, they are not filleted. So I went back in time here with this. So this stuff wasn't here. Actually, let me just delete what this was, and I'll show you. That was there. That wasn't there. Okay, so that fillet, delete. That pull out, delete. Let's see what happens. Yep, that was fine. And then I duplicated it and I went forward. So here is what I did. I went back before I duplicated this, which is the grip. So in this, I copied it 50 times around the object. So what I did is I went back and I went to my fillet and I filleted that edge. Another quick tip here is hit Q, press pull, which is my most used modify command, and it goes to fillet automatically. And when you're doing these kind of inside fillets or detail fillets, not even usable fillets, because you wouldn't put this in the final result if you're having it milled on a CNC machine or whatever else, 3D printer. I mean, you're not going to print this, but as an example, you wouldn't actually put these fillets in. This is just, what I'm doing is only for the render. It's only to make it look nice. So either make a copy of your object and render the secondary object with the extra details, or you have to go back and remove them when you want to actually export this for a make. I'm going to go 0.05. And I think that's a pretty good size fillet just as a detail for this, because nothing in real life is going to be 90 degrees. There's that. The inside here, I want a smaller fillet. So what I'm going to do is select my edges only, edges priority. And I'm going to go back actually and hide this object so I can't select it. And I'm going to highlight all this, and it selects only the edges. So now let's hit Q, which is our push-pull, but because the edges are selected, it slides over to the fillet. It's sort of this thing that Fusion does. I wish that they had actually a key command for chamfer. I use chamfer all the time. I think everyone uses chamfer all the time. Why is there no key command for chamfer? Let's go point on here. 0.05. Let's see what it looks like. How about 0.02? Just the tiniest little detail. It's just to make it look more real. Add our part back. Now if you look, this wouldn't happen, this gap between here and here. So what I do is hit Q, again press pull, most used command, and just go 0.1, very small amount, even 0.03, just enough to get past that fillet. Okay, it's still a separate object. And now because I've added those back in time here in the history panel, I go forward, it will copy that with the change. You see how it just goes past it? I go to the very end, and it has now added it all together. It finalizes everything I did after, and now I have all these lovely fillets. So when you render it, you're not going to have that sharp edge. You're going to have the light scattering properly across this object. I don't know why it rendered like that. That's so weird. If I go like this, just give it a second or two, you're gonna see it does on fast. My computer's getting bogged down. So you get the idea. I'm not gonna make you wait for that. Where that light, even in this false render, it has a little bit of a shadow as it goes around that curve. It's just for realism. It's the tip and trick that I tell people who really want to get the best results out of rendering. And let me just show you what I mean. Zoom in. Look at that. I love this. This looks so good. It looks really good. Look at that. And that's really, there's that little fillet. I think it was a 0.05, not 0.01 or 2 like I did before. The last thing is you can adjust things here. Delete it, obviously. If you have an animation, you can animate it. You can render out the animation. I'll make a video on that later on. Post-processing. So you can adjust things. This will have to re-render. But then we also have this download function. You can download a PNG, JPEG, TIFF, or EXR. I actually don't know what that's for, to be honest. It's a new one for me. But TIFF is the best quality. So if you're going for the best quality, you want to blow this up as a massive poster, get TIFF. If you want no background at all, just the object, click the transparency button, and you can download, same thing, TIFF or PNG. JPEGs do not have transparency built into the file format, which means you can't download it as transparency. But let's say you have a transparent part and in Photoshop and you export as a JPEG, you're going to end up getting a white background. That's the standard for the format. So PNG is my default for just low res photos, and TIFF is for high res. And that's basically it. So you click it and it opens up your file window, and you can select where you want to save it, and you save it, name it whatever you want. Escape. Other things like sharing and stuff, you can figure out what those are on your own. Why doesn't it? Oh well. Let's go back, and I know why. There's no close button. So that's it. I hope this video helps you. If you're learning rendering for the very first time, this basically goes through all the steps you really need to do to make sure you have a good render. And you can mess around and try your best. And I promise you, after a couple of attempts, using the stuff I just talked about, you'll get some great results. It's just about looking for those details, looking for those stylistic changes. If you have any experience with photography, then you should have an easier time doing this. If you know about the 2/3 rule, of the rule of thirds in photography, then you'll understand what I mean when I say setting up your shot is the best way to get the best result. I mean, it's really about the eye that you have versus the program itself, because you can change things, and the program is just responding to what you do. Now, I'm going to end here. Bit of a long video. Thanks again for watching. Remember to subscribe and like the video, because if you do that, it helps out YouTube and they promote it if it's liked and subscribed more often, or viewed more often. And I can help more people. I mean, the goal here is just to really help people get the hang of the program, because it's an amazing program. It does a lot of stuff. And I think a lot of people that want to get into designing things who don't work in the professional field can do this with Fusion, and they can do it in a professional way. And that's my goal, is to really get them on board, and that builds our community, builds our base. So again, thanks, and I will see you next time.